First of all, excellent work on this series.
Thank you.
My daughter had begged me to watch it because she read it in high school just a few months before. I read it in high school. My other daughter read it in high school. So we had a lot of high expectations, and you delivered.
Did you watch it together? Did you watch it as a three?
Yes, we did.
Oh, that's
Actually,
lovely.
four. My wife as well.
That's lovely. That's lovely. That's what you want, isn't it? You know what I mean? Like, TV shows that you can all watch on the couch and talk about afterwards. That's really, that makes me very happy.
Yeah, it's a bit darker than we usually watch together, but I thought, knowing the subject and that my daughters had read it, I think they were ready for it because they already had broken it down in school and everything. But it does tackle a lot of subjects that are, very important. And that's one of the things, when I read it, it burned a place in my soul. I'm serious. I read it 30 years ago, and I remember it like it was yesterday. The story about the lust for power, the power of fear, the breakdown of civility. It changed me and how I see people.
Yeah.
So
me too.
What was the initial draw to taking on this story?
I'll start because it was a book that changed me. I read it late at night. It was my mum's copy. I wasn't doing it for school. I just read it because it was on the shelf. And I had that moment that happens very rarely in literature, film, TV, books, everything, where you go, I am someone. I am this person. And that for me was Simon. I understood why Simon was as Simon was. And then suddenly, 2/3 of the way through the book, my character was killed. And I remember the sort of heart being pulled out of my chest. It really felt like that to me, where he talked about the body drifting out to sea. And I was like, what? How could this happen? How could this happen to someone I love? And then, and I kept going back to it. It was one of those books that I just kept rereading and rereading and rereading. And I tried to make it about 15 years ago, and we couldn't get the rights. And then Joel Wilson, who's a friend of both of ours, and the exec producer of the project, said to me, go on, what's the book? What's the one book? We were having Sunday lunch together, and he said, what's the one book that you'd do anything to adapt? And I said, Lord of the Flies. Always been Lord of the Flies. It's always been my answer to that question. And he said, I'm going to make that happen. And wonderfully he did. And then I twisted Mark's arm and forced him to come with us on the journey.
For me, it was I'd seen the Peter Brook version. That's obviously an iconic film, and it was a little bit daunting trying to do an adaptation of it. But as soon as I read the script, I was really, really struck. First of all, about the politics of it. It was an opportunity to tell a political story, but which somehow shed light on what's happening today with a lot of hate and a lot of instincts are coming out of hate, but also the sort of depth of that understanding of it in terms of the characters and being able to see, for instance, Jack as an unloved child, someone that had been neglected, and see the micro decisions that they're all making, the alliances that are made within that. And it just felt like a really great adventure story which describes what might be happening today in a lot of ways.
That's incredible. Yeah, for me, you mentioned characters. For me, it was Piggy. And when Piggy's fate is revealed, it gutted me. I was like, that not supposed to happen. Always the kid was always picked on and, kind of the outsider, but good kid just trying to survive, and then to have that harsh reality set upon him. But so I want to.
It's really interesting, because in sort of film and the vocabulary that we're used to with all these things, the good characters survive. And the interesting thing with what Golding did is the sort of two really kind characters both end up dead. It's a very, very interesting decision by Golding.
Yeah, it's. I really wish I had 3 hours with you because I could talk forever. So I need to continue to. No, it's great. I love that, but I just want to make sure I get a few questions in because this connects to that. So you chose to do it in 4 chapters, 4 different characters. What was the thinking behind that? Because like you're saying, you really need to connect with these characters in order for you to kind of. When in a book you get that time. So what was the thinking here?
It was our first pitch to the estate. Was that was the vocabulary with which we wanted to use it, and it's all about what TV can do, because I think TV is a remarkable place to tell stories. Which isn't to say that veteran film aren't also remarkable, but I think there's something about the vocabulary of TV that really suit certain types of adaptation. And with this, that it was that thing of, when I read it as a kid, I hated Jack. I just saw him as the guy in the playground that I knew and I hated. And when I got older, I had a greater understanding of him, and because I understood that Golding was writing about him with tenderness, and so it was like that was the aim of this telling. It was to tell it with the complexity that Golding told it with, and so it was like, okay, let's do a relay race. Let's do a relay race where we're passing the conch between these different characters, and let's give Jack the crucial episode. Let's give Jack the episode where the cracks really appear in a way that the island cannot recover from. And there's so many actions within the book, there's so many set pieces within the book that actually ended up suiting that structure. And I had to lay it all out for the estate. And they sort of saw what we could do with the book that was different from any telling previously. And that's why they thankfully gave us the rights.
Please don't take my my thing about how I have to get questions out here. Like I said, I could listen all day long. I just, so please don't take that wrong. It didn't sound.
No. I hear you.
Okay, you have the conch. So there are so many individual shots that you can break down, and so much symbolism. But two that stood out to me. One is the first shot of the two groups on the beach, where you have this kind of uniform, organized group, and you have this bundle of kids. And the contrast, and I think I would love to frame that on my wall. And another one is during the plane crash. The squealing pig sound coming out of the boy's mouth gave me flashbacks to Disney's Pinocchio, Pleasure Island.
Yeah.
Two things. Can you just talk about some of the symbolism in the show? And was that Pinocchio's Pleasure Island inspiration at all there?
Well, Lord of the Flies, when it was written first, was very clearly about class in some sort of way. The entitled choir versus the sort of, the middle class, dutiful Democrat that steps up to be leader, the working class piggy. And it was really, really important that we got the iconography of that right, which is why we ended up putting the choir in very traditional outfits, which would have been right for the period. But there's another thing about the beginning of the book, which is extraordinary, which is there's been this big plane crash, but no one appears to have been hurt in any way. And there's something sort of quite mystical about that. And as much as possible, I try to have these people appearing out of nowhere. And the choir is a really good example of that, as they're singing as they come along the beach. They're singing a modern mass, Benjamin Britten's Missa Brevis, and they come out of light. Yeah, contemporary to the time, which is 1950s, which is most of the music in the piece, apart from the music written by Cristobal Tapia de Vera and Hans Zimmer, comes out of the 1950s. And they appear out of light in some sort of way. And that was the only way that I could somehow envisage all these boys coming together. And of course, that first shot is, the contrast of that ordered, entitled, rather privileged group of boys, and on the other hand, the sort of, the mixture of middle class and working class boys on the other. So those were the two elements of that. But what I wanted was what Peter Brook actually put in his film. I think it's probably wasn't in the script, which was the choir to be singing as they came down the beach. But it was, in this case, it's an apparition. It's something that they can't quite work out what it is. Is it a beast? Is it something? And that's what it resolves into. Those two. That one image. What was the other one? The other image?
Oh, just the Pinocchio, because
that
haunted
screaming.
me as well.
Yeah. I mean, we had some great pig squeals, which are all library squeals. And I just thought at the point that Morris was screaming, we just put a pig squealing in his mouth. And it's one of those sort of little gambles that, pays off. It's sort of blood curdling, and it echoes right throughout the piece as you go through when they're killing the pig, and also when Simon is being attacked. The pig, he's squealing in the same sort of way. Because they are like, at that point they're prey. They are, they're prey in those boys' hands.
So you instantly, as soon as you watch this, the color, the use of different camera lenses, the handheld camera work enhances the story, and it takes a little while to try to figure out the thinking behind it and kind of get accustomed to that world, because it's not just as straightforward as you see with a lot of other story adaptations. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of wanted it to be an immersive experience. I'm not really I think film can be cleverer than just to stand back and just watch things occurring. But I mean, a lot of decisions that one's making all the time when one's filming are sort of just decisions that you make in the moment. Definitely the documentary type camera work, when you've got 36 boys, you can't help but be just trying to grab stuff as they're playing the scene, I mean, with 36 boys, you've always got one person looking at the camera. You've always got one person in the side of shot goofing off, Very often there's someone with a little battery-operated fan or something in there. And you've got to grab the bits that work. So that's what's behind the sort of documentary element of it. But also, I mean, I really felt that I wanted to sort of use the island as an element to sort of echo what the boys were going through, and that was behind a lot of decisions about the hallucinatory foliage. That was also a sort of a decision that we had to make, because a fifth of the script is written at night, isn't it? Yep. And we couldn't film during night because the boys had to be finished at sort of 4, 5, 6 in the afternoon, so it was never dark when we filmed, and there was always direct sunlight around and things. So we shot it day for night using a camera which Mark Wolf, a cinematographer, adapted, taking out an infrared filter in it, which changes the foliage all to red and green and pink and things. And that sort of, I use that to sort of echo the sort of the sort of breakdown of what was happening to them and the hallucinatory aspects of what Simon was seeing as well, at night. So those are the choices behind the camera work, and a lot of the nature there was shot in the moment. We saw sea eagles swooping, and captured that in some sort of way. But somehow, I just tried to make them echo what was going on within this little group of boys. It all comes back to that little group of characters. It all comes back to all those motivations. Everything should echo out from that.
Mark is very modest, and he always sort of says that it comes about by accident, and actually he is such a designer of truth. That that there's so many beautiful grace notes that he finds through the whole telling. One of my favourite bits is when the boys have just killed the pig, when the choir have just killed the pig, and then they go into the water. They find the water and they all sort of dive into the water and they're playing, and Mark plays the footage backwards, and it's such a sort of like, he clearly tried it in the edit and was like, oh, that's how we tell it at this point. That's how we capture the joy and the chaos at that moment, and he does that all the time. I think TV authorship always gets ascribed to the writer, and what I'm so proud of in this show is that I feel like we both authored this show, and he really did have the conch and do such interesting work over and over and over again in a way that I think is remarkable.
And after living through this story as long and as deeply as you did and breaking it down for decades, it sounds like, do you find any threads of hope in it, or are we doomed as a species?
I find loads of threads of hope. I think Golding finds hope. I don't think there's anything inevitable about what happens on that island. And I think that there's moments when the story could be completely different. What he's talking about is how we can accidentally fall into holes, and when those and let those holes consume us. But actually, there's loads of tenderness there. There's loads of moments of true emotional connection that happen on that island. And if they only happen in a slightly different way, if only these boys had been socialized slightly differently, then maybe that island could have been a beautiful place. I get thrown all the time this Tongan story. Have you heard the Tongan story? About boys on an island, they ended up on a desert island. They actually ran away, and they ended up on a desert island, and they got together, and they got on very well, and they did beautifully together. But that's because they have been socialized in a completely different way to how 1950s schoolboys have been socialized, and they didn't have the sort of damage of a parental generation that survived 2 world wars. And so I see huge moments of hope and huge moments of caution within it.
I think Golding was a school teacher, for 30 years, and he absolutely invested in all these characters in a very sort of profound way. You can tell from reading. And Jack has sort of, I think you're similar in a way. You've invested them with a sort of humanity and a sort of a three-dimensional thing, which means that those things aren't inevitable. You can spot the little fractures happening. And what was interesting was the kids all recognised that as well. They understood it implicitly. Yeah.
In Coen Brothers films, they always say there's no small characters. That every character in the Coen Brothers has got a full biography to it. That's how I feel about Golding's writing. I think every single one of those he's thought about so carefully.
Yeah, maybe it's just the cynical world we live in right now, the darkness that kind of surrounds us every day, that I kind of go in thinking, hey, we've lost. And when you see what happens on the island, I'm like, yeah, those moments of hope are there, but can they be salvaged? I do have to wrap though, so we'll save that for another time.
Okay. Well, then we're going to do a proper 3-hour conversation sometime. Yeah.
Yes, please, because I only have 2 questions, and I have a dozen more on page 1. All right, thank you so much. Have a great day.
Send my best to your daughters. Thank you.
I will. Thank you.